Ceri is a very experienced freelance teacher, trainer and materials writer, and she's been working in ELT since 1986 and in Spain since 1998. She currently teaches in Cadiz, or rather Cadiz. Ceri is the co-author of Eyes Open and Uncover. So, over to you, Ceri.
Hi everybody, how are you doing? Thank you very much, Annie. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I can see quite a few names of different places in the chat box there. So for the next hour, we're going to be discussing culture and the role of culture in the classroom particularly. So let me give you a little summary quickly of what we're going to be looking at. Okay, so we're going to talk about using cultural topics specifically with secondary students, so in the teenage classroom, or should we say from the age of 11 or 12 upwards. And we're going to be looking at what culture is, what aspects of culture we want to talk about in the classroom, and we'll be looking particularly at the question of arousing students' curiosity about other cultures and also about their own culture. Okay, so are we ready to move on? Just waiting for my slide. Okay, so first of all, we're going to look at what exactly culture is. We're going to be exploring some common universal themes. We're going to look at that question of arousing curiosity, and then we're going to look at how we can help students make personal connections between their culture and others. And at the end, we'll talk about moving from consuming culture to producing culture. Okay, so let's look at the word culture itself. It's a big word. It can be spelt with a capital C or with a small c. And in this case, we're looking at small c culture. In the chat box, can you offer a possible definition for the word culture? Sergei, a set of values. I can see lots of people are typing. Wait to see for your definitions. A way of living. From Sada. Artwork, values, stances, traditions, ideas, history, civilizations, the way we do things, beliefs. Okay, wonderful. So there's this fantastic stream in the chat box at the moment of all various different kinds of definitions. And of course, because it's such a large term, there are a lot of different possible definitions. So let's have a look at a couple which are echoed by your contributions there in the chat box. Here we go. This is taken from the Cambridge Online Dictionary. And I think that chimes in there with what you've been saying, the way of life. So as some of you were saying, the way people do things, okay, of a particular group of people at a particular time. So in the examples there, we can see that culture doesn't need to be geographical. It can be a question of age. It can be a question possibly of a profession or of a shared interest. In the second example, we've got more the idea of the traditional idea of culture here with the Japanese language and culture. So we have the two different sides of the word there. Okay, so if we take this idea of culture equals a way of life, and I think this is probably the aspect of culture that is most accessible to teenagers because they themselves are exploring their way of life and are interested in seeing how other people do the things that they do, and if they're similar or different. So this is one way that we can arouse curiosity in students, is either that they see what they think might be a very distant culture and realize that actually they're very similar, or maybe to see something in a new light from within their own culture, or to see something that's new or strange and want to know more about it. So I think here the key is getting the students creating questions in their own minds about whatever aspect of culture it is that we're looking at. And answering these questions becomes also a question of exploring their own culture. So they make it personal by looking at an aspect of life, the way people do a particular thing. They see it happening in one cultural context, and then they explore how they do that themselves and if it's similar or different. And so it, as well as becoming aware of other cultures, for teenagers it's also important that they become more self-aware, more aware of how what they do may be actually specific to their own group of people, to their own community, or to their own country possibly. So making connections between different cultures is something that students really enjoy, and it really helps them in this stage of their development. So let's look at how this works in practice in the classroom. So first of all, we're going to think about this idea of topics, cultural topics, which might arouse in, curiosity, where students will be able to make personal connections. And we're thinking about topics which are cross-cultural, things, aspects of life which exist across all cultures. So, for example, the example we're going to take first is totally global and totally universal. And apologies to anyone who is waiting to have a meal or to eat, but the topic that we're going to explore first is food. Okay, so if you're hungry, you might get even more curious about this particular topic. But obviously food is a global topic, a universal topic, but it's also something which varies massively locally. So it's interesting to be able to look at how the global and the local, so the universal and the personal, how those two things connect. Let's take an example. So I'm sure you all recognize this symbol. And why are we going to look at McDonald's particularly? Well, obviously the golden arches of the McDonald's icon are totally universal. I'd be interested to see in the chat box, is there anybody who doesn't have some kind of a McDonald's outlet in their hometown? A yes or a no in the chat box. Okay, Artur, Elena. Okay, that's interesting. So we've got a couple of people who are saying there are no McDonald's outlets. There are none in Iceland. Okay, actually I'm thinking about it. There are none in my hometown in West Wales. I think we have a Burger King, but not a McDonald's. So there's this idea that McDonald's is totally a global company that exists all over the world. But then we see this idea of glocal. So if you see there, McDonald's, a global company adopting a glocal strategy. Now, the word glocal, I'm sure you know the word, is made up of two separate words, which are obviously global and local. And what exactly is a glocal strategy? Well, first of all, I'm going to ask you to just imagine in your mind's eye a typical McDonald's burger. Okay? Can you just picture that in your mind's eye? Just give me a yes or a no if you can see a McDonald's burger right now. Okay, I'm getting lots of yeses. Yeah, okay, so sure, you've got that. Now, in your local McDonald's outlet, for those of you who have one, if you're from Iceland or West Wales, I think we're going to have to think about experiences of McDonald's elsewhere. Can you think of any local variations on a McDonald's burger? Are there any local variations? And if there are, what are they? What a Greek burger. Okay, that's interesting. Sergey, can you tell us a little bit more about the Greek burger? A kimchi burger. That sounds like it would be in Korea. Turkey. A turkey burger in a Muslim country. A fan burger. Okay. So we can all think of all these various different versions, these variations on the global theme, which has adapted to a local theme. And this is where I think we can look at interesting transcultural phenomena that teenagers are going to be interested in. So fast food is one of those things which is universal for teenagers, but also it's local as well. So there's your local take on fast food. Okay, so we're going to explore some classroom material looking at exactly this topic of the glocalization of fast food, or even the local version of the global fast food. So there are two things going on here. One is, how has the global adapted to the local, but also what is the local version that is possibly being taken over by the universal one. Let's look at some concrete examples. Okay, here you see some different kinds of fast food from various different places. What fast food can you see? What kind of food is in the pictures? Pizza, Mexican, taco, pizza. What else? What are the others showing? Ice cream and tacos and coconuts. That's right, and coconuts. Okay, and Indian food, yeah. So I think someone's saying watermelon. I actually think it's coconuts rather than watermelon there on the truck in the bottom left-hand corner. What do these 5 photos have in common? If you look at the 5 photos, mobile, movement, delivery, that's right. So this is about food delivery. It's about the kind of food that you can have delivered, the kind of food that you normally have delivered to your home if you have food delivered, or it might not be to your home, it might be to your workplace. Okay, so in what vehicles can we see here which are transporting and delivering? We have a bike, yeah, and a truck, and a van, and a motorcycle. Yep, all of these are pretty typical, no? They're all being delivered by people, yeah? Can you think of any other alternative delivery methods then? Boat. Yes, Artur is saying boat. Yes, I think on the Black Sea in Turkey there was a boat delivering fish sandwiches. I remember once, and I think in Thailand on the canal markets as well, you get your food delivered by boat. Skates. Drones. Yes, that's right. That's what I was thinking of when you said people. Of course, it doesn't have to be people now. We have this idea of drones dropping pizzas on our heads. Roller skates, yes, I love that as well. Okay, so here, just by opening it out, we've got some photographs of fast food delivery in a couple of different contexts, and we can start exploring what other kind of fast food delivery is possible. Where is it possible? Is it actually possible in your hometown? Is it something that you've seen in a YouTube clip? Is it something that you've seen on television? And just opening out this whole idea of how many different ways foods can be delivered. Submarines, I see there. I love the idea of submarines delivering your food. Artur, does that exist? I'm going to wait to see if you give me an answer there in the chat. So now let's have a look at the pictures again. And would you like to type a number and the name of the country where you think the photo could have been taken? So any one of them. The third could be in Brazil. Is that because of the mountains? The first in India, the fourth in Mexico. We've got, so the first, the third, the fourth, no problems. The second, the fifth in Rome. The scooters of Rome are very famous. The fifth could be in Japan. The second could be in the UK. The fifth could be in India. The fourth could be in Peru. Okay, so the fifth could be in the UK. So what I love here is the fact that actually there's no wrong answer necessarily here, that you can... Number two, where is that? It looks like it might be British, but then again it might not. Number five is wonderful. The scooter is so universal. The scooter could be almost anywhere. And I think it depends very much on your own personal experiences, whether they be first-hand or second-hand because you've seen them on a screen somewhere. For me, that automatically I thought Rome. But then when someone said Japan, I looked closer and I thought, well, wow, yes, okay, it could equally be Japan. And so again, we're just here, we're just cashing in on personal experiences, personal connections, and then the next step would be to ask you all, so which one of these is most frequent and most popular in your hometown? What is the number one delivery method in your hometown? Okay, we're still getting, yeah, car. Car, okay, that's interesting. Car is the motorcycle, motorbike, car, motorbike, bike, scooter. Yeah, yeah, okay. On foot. We're getting there from Anna, on foot. I'm guessing must be a smaller place if it's on foot. Car. Okay, lovely. So, and the very last question, of course, is what kind of food do you think is the most common food delivered, first of all, in the world? What is the most... Okay, I think we have a universal agreement on this. Pizza. Okay, so pizza, the number one most delivered. And in your hometown, is that any different? Or would you say that pizza was still the number one home delivered? Pizza again, some are saying burger. Okay. Japanese food. Argentinian pizza, ice cream, and empanadas. Wonderful. So, and now if you wanted your students to do a little web quest, for example, then you could ask them to actually search for that. The most popular delivery food in the world, or the top 5 most popular delivery foods, and they could find out for themselves if their answer of pizza, for example, was correct, and so that they would be... So we have the question there, the the curiosity, and it's actually the students are going out and finding the answer for it themselves. But it's also a very contained and controlled web quest, so that it's not going to be something that becomes difficult for you to manage. All they need to do is quickly type that question into Google and then share the answers they got. Okay, so now we're going to look a little bit more closely at one of these deliveries in particular. I'm going to move on. Okay, so we're going to look at number 1. And this country, I think some of you got it earlier. What is the country? It's India. That's right. Okay. And we're going to have a look at this particular type of food delivery. And the questions that I would ask the students to think about before they watch and then as they watch is, first of all, what kind of food is he delivering? Where is he delivering it to? And what other transport does he use? Okay, so you can see there in the clip below that this is actually from Mumbai. So even though I can see there that there are other suggestions for the country, or it could be Bangladesh, it certainly could. But in this case, it's from Mumbai. And this is a clip from a Discovery video, a Discovery documentary about the life of the dabbawalas in Mumbai. So rather than tell you any more about them, I'm going to ask Charlotte now to show us the video. And remember, what kind of food, where to?
City? It is. There are more than 20 million people there.
Wow.
But some people only work there. They don't live there.
Have you got any family in Mumbai?
Yes, my cousins live there. This is my cousin Arvind. He's a dabbawala.
Sorry, a what?
A dabbawala. He takes lunch to people.
Huh.
For lunch, a lot of Indians eat rice and soup and vegetables. You know, hot food. A lot of people, like this man, prepare the food in their kitchens. The food goes in a metal lunchbox, and then a dabbawala comes for it.
Aren't there any good restaurants in Mumbai?
Of course, but a lot of Indians prefer a hot meal from home.
I see. How many dabbawalas are there in Mumbai?
There are 4,000 of them, and they take lunches to 175,000 people.
Really? That's amazing.
Okay, thank you. Right. I'm going to wait just a few seconds because for some people the video may still be running. Okay. If your video has now finished, could you just type yes, please, in the chat box? Okay, lovely. Looks like we can continue then. So the initial questions were what kind of food, and I could see that you saw that. Could you type it again? What kind of food is the dabbawala delivering? It's lunch. It's rice. Just rice? Rice and vegetables? Rice soup and vegetables? Okay, lovely. And what form of transport are they using? So they're using the bike and the train. They're actually getting onto public transport as well for the deliveries. And I think this is something which could be a little bit different from the answers that the students have been given, certainly different from the answers that you were giving earlier, is this idea that, oh yeah, okay, food can also be delivered on public transport. And it's something that you were saying there in the chat box. So the delivery is slightly different. What's different about the food that's being delivered? This isn't fast food, is it? What kind of food is it? It's hot food, it's home food, it's home cooked food. It's the food that they would have in their own homes if they were having lunch at homes. Okay, and it's freshly made. So here we have that slight difference then of what we expect in fast food delivery, and then suddenly we're seeing a different twist on it, another cultural take on it. Someone was asking in the chat box earlier, or saying it must be delicious, and I have to say that I've been lucky enough to actually try some of this dabbawala food, and it is delicious, and it comes piping hot and tastes of homemade cooking. So there's this idea that even though you're at the office all day in this incredibly busy world of work, you can still have a taste of home. So one of the things that I like to then ask my students to explore is, what if you could transport this idea of dabbawalas to your hometown? What kind of food would the dabbawalas deliver? Okay. If it was home cooking, a warm lunch, what kind of food would it be? So that's my question to you first of all. If you had a dabbawala service in your hometown or the town where you're based at the moment, what would there be? So we're having Turkish kebab, rice, beans, vegetables, peki, I'm not sure what that is, soup, rice and beans, pasta, pasta con le cime del rape, that's one of my favorite, waffles, homemade pies, and this is kind of like a nice way to get students to, sorry, to think about their favorite traditional home foods. And if you just ask them kind of, okay, what do you think are the most typical traditional foods in your town? You won't get many answers. But if you turn it like this and you say, what would you like the dabbawala to be able to deliver you at school, for example, and then you'd be able, I think you get a different response because it's coming from a slightly different, unusual angle. Okay, so one of the things that then I set students to do is to actually think about this as a project that they are going to set up a dabbawala business within their hometown, and I give them parameters to discuss and decide together, and then they build a project which they present, and it can be a simple exercise that you do in one class, or it can be something that they work on as a group over a series of classes. They can add images to their presentation of the food that they're thinking of delivering, and then they present their idea and get to comment on each other's presentations. So you can take this wherever you want it to go, but initially what they're doing is they're exploring another culture, and then they're borrowing things from that culture and taking it back into their own. So we have this idea of exploring something which is different and then making personal connections, and then hopefully moving on from consuming the culture to actually producing something, in this case an idea of the kind of traditional food that they would like to promote through their dabbawala deliveries. If you want your students to, again, explore this idea further of the dabbawalas, then it's very easy to set them a web quest. For example, I really like the website which is linked there on the page, which is the actual real dabbawalas talking about why they think dabbawalas are important, why their job is an important social job. And it's a lovely site for students to explore. Or they might want to look for other videos or images. Again, it's something that's very accessible for them to take a topic off the page of their coursebook and see that this isn't just something in a book, but it's out there as well, and that they can follow the trail, as it were. So I think it's always important when we're exploring a topic that we can allow the students to then take it on themselves and explore it in the directions that they want to explore it in. Okay. So moving on from the dabbawalas. Okay, so, oh, sorry, moved on too fast. Okay, so how many different food types can you see in the image? Lots. Thank you, Zoe. Yes. More than 30? Well, some of them are food types and some of them are actually names of countries or geographical regions. Is that right? Okay, so we've got pizza, salad, noodles, cakes, ice cream, desserts, candy, etc. Okay, so where do you think this image comes from? Which country would you think this image comes from? Okay, I'm getting the USA, I'm getting Japan, UK, Canada. Zoe, Bristol has one of these. You're right. Okay, so this actually is the one in Bristol that Zoe identified there. What kind of restaurant do you think this Zaza Bazaar is? You think it might be takeaways, Linda? And you think it might be fast food? An all-you-can-eat buffet, maybe? International cuisine? All-you-can-eat, yeah. It's actually one of these kind of mock marketplace type of restaurants where you have lots of different outlets selling all the different types of food, and then everyone sits down at the same tables in the center so that you can go and you can choose what kind of food you want to eat. And there's that idea that there's something for everybody. Okay, so this ties in a little bit with the idea of typical food. And if I said to you, what is typical British food, what would your answer be? Fish and chips, baked beans, bacon, curry, bacon and eggs, afternoon tea, fish and chips. If you asked your teenage students the same question, would they know how to answer, or would they have no idea? Not much idea, I'm guessing. Some of you saying yes, they can, others that they would answer quite well, others that they'd have no idea. Okay, fish and chips, maybe. Okay, so I think there's also this idea that the concept of typical British food in Britain has been lost, that typical British food is actually food from all over the world. And here is a text. You're not going to be able to read the text. We've done that on purpose, so we've smudged the text so it's not actually legible. But this is a teenager talking about typical English food from her point of view. And in the background, you can actually see the door to the Zaza Bazaar that we were looking at earlier. And we have this very personal point of view from a teenager talking about the things which for her are typical. Okay, and there are some traditional things in there, and there's some surprising things in there as well. And the idea here is that there is no such thing as typical, that actually the culture of food is possibly more to do with your family and the culture of your family. Okay, so in this case, let's have a look at the pictures. Let's have a look at Rupa's family. And what do you think 13-year-old Rupa has to say about English food? And yes, for everyone, the text is not clear on purpose. The text is not supposed to be legible. So we've got, it's disappointing, she doesn't like it. Maybe she does like it. She likes variety. Okay, this is great. So these are all the, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to do that. So these are all the possible reactions. And if you ask a teenager, what do you think she's going to be saying about food? And then they're going to have other reactions as well. And then they read the text and they find out what Rupa's reactions are to British food. And basically what she says is that there are things that she loves, there are things she doesn't like, there are things that her dad cooks, there are things that her mum cooks, there are things that come from her mum's culture and from her friend's culture, and then she ends up by talking about the Zaza Bazaar, and that's her favourite restaurant. And why does she like it? Well, she likes it because of the variety, because you can get anything you want there. And so, well, how can we transpose this then to our students? Well, the idea is that we have a teenager, so someone who's sharing their culture in terms of age, talking about something which is culturally specific to her family and her hometown and her country. And we could ask students to have a look to see, okay, what similarities are there between you and Rupa? What differences are there between you and Rupa? Do you think this is just a personal difference, or is this a cultural difference? And so we can ask them to read the text a second time, a little bit more critically, and explore the different influences on a person's tastes. So where are your influences personal? When are they cultural? Where do they come from? Do they come from your family? Do they come from your community? And this is something that brings additional information and additional critical thinking about any kind of cultural information that we present to our students, no matter how simple the information is. If we ask them to then compare that information with the information that they would give about themselves or about their culture, then we're getting them to explore critically this gap between different ways of talking about and representing cultures. Okay, so food then is one of these wonderful universal topics that can work on any level, I think, with any age or in any community. What other universal topics can you think of? Could you, in the chat box, suggest other universal topics which could work as well as food? We've got traditions. What kind of traditions? I think we need to be a little bit more focused. Music. Music is a nice one. Music for teenagers very much, I think, a global, or to a large extent global. And I think it'd probably be interesting to explore the layers between the global and the personal, and which of their tastes are shared with this kind of YouTube culture, the culture of teenagers who are all consuming the same music, and to what extent it's also influenced by local music. So we've got dancing, that's an interesting one. Fashion, clothes is a very interesting one to explore, I think, and to see how different countries influence each other, how different countries and traditions and customs influence universal fashion. Festivals is an interesting one as well, definitely. I think, again, there's this universal idea that everybody in every country across the world celebrates festivals, and there will be lots of similarities, but and that's interesting to explore in itself, but probably the curious information, the things that are going to switch teenagers on, are going to be the things that are slightly different, slightly unusual, but always having got the hook of, oh, look at this wonderful, interesting, unusual thing that happens here. The thing which actually helps us to expand on a topic is to explore that area where things are the same. Okay, so other topics here are football. Football is wonderful as a transcultural phenomenon. The different ways that fans celebrate their team's victories, for example, the different colours of the flags and what they stand for, the different colours of the teams wear, the competitions all over the world. I think that even if you claim to be completely uninterested in football, I think there's always something that you're going to want to talk about to do with the whole phenomenon of football across the world. Okay, so I think we're coming to an end there of this kind of short exploration of culture and how we can interest our students in exploring culture and making culture their own. And we're going to stop now for some questions. So I'm going to hand back to Annie a second to pick up on some of the questions that have been coming up for us in the chat box.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Ceri, for such an interesting session. So, yes, over to you, everybody. I've got one question here from Letitia. Could you please comment on culture and subculture and how it could be used in a classroom, Ceri? Have you got any? You've given
okay,
some in your talk, so I wondered if you had any further tips.
Okay, I'm guessing here, and please stop me if I'm getting the definitions wrong here of culture and subculture, that maybe culture is culture with a capital C, in the idea of the arts and customs and traditions of a country which are automatically linked and identified with that country. And a subculture would be something like elements of youth culture or alternative culture, which would sometimes be in contradiction with what the iconic culture would be. And I think that can be a very, very interesting area to explore. For example, in the area of art, so you might have the capital C culture art of art galleries and famous artists from that country, but the subculture could be exploring street art or graffiti, how graffiti is used, where graffiti is used, who are the graffiti artists in your community, where is the graffiti in your community, or where is the street art? It might not be graffiti, it might be some other form of street art. And teenagers are far more likely, I've found, to identify obviously with the subculture rather than the culture with a capital C. But it's quite nice to maybe just as a beginning of that topic to have the stark contrast between a classic work of art in a gallery and a piece of street art in its context, and then get the students to compare the two, find as many similarities as they can, and then to talk about what is graffiti art? To what extent is street art art? What is it doing? And they can go out into the street and find examples of graffiti. It's made me to be censored sometimes, and bring that back into the classroom, present them where they saw it, why they think that person painted that graffiti. So I think for me that would be a nice kind of way of looking at the divide possibly, and sometimes the imbalance between that idea of culture and subculture. I don't know if I've answered that correctly.
Okay.
Is that what you meant?
Thanks very much, Ceri. That's right. I've got another question from Larissa. I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce the surname. Sorry, Larissa. What is the aim of studying cultures in detail? And do we study cultures, or do we study the English language through cultures? Not sure if there's a right or wrong answer to that, but it'd be interesting to explore nonetheless. Ceri, have you got any ideas?
Okay, I think this is a very interesting one. There's quite a few questions in one there. I think the first one was, why do we study culture? And are we studying culture, or are we studying language through culture? So from my point of view, it's a way of engaging students in a discussion where they will feel personally connected with the material that they're discussing, that they're talking about, and that this idea of universal cultures and their local differences is, I think, something that all students will be able to talk about and will be motivated to read about, to listen about, to talk about. So for me, as a language teacher, I think motivation is the key. As a secondary school teacher, we're seeing more and more importance being placed on global competencies. And what is a global competency? Well, this is a lot to do with awareness of cultures, sensitivity towards cultural differences, also a self-awareness of our own cultures and the place of our culture alongside others. It's a complex area, but it's definitely something which is being given more and more space on the secondary curriculum. So I think yes to everything. I'm not sure. There was an interesting question as well I caught there somewhere, Annie, about appropriation of culture. I don't know if you caught that one too.
From Alan Polvaness, do you think that transcultural adoption can sometimes be seen as cultural appropriation? Sorry, my glasses aren't strong enough. For example, recent criticism of UK adaptations of Spanish food.
Okay, I think this is quite. That's quite. It's an interesting current topic, which is particularly sensitive in the United States. It's suddenly become an incredibly sensitive area, this idea of appropriating other people's cultures, and that it's seen as being deeply offensive in a multicultural context for people who are seen or labeled as being from one culture to be using the symbols or icons of another. For example, I think an example that was in the news recently was a party where students were wearing mini Mexican sombreros, but the students weren't Mexican, and so it had been seen as being offensive and was against the rules of conduct of that particular university, and those students were punished for that. And there's this question of, in a truly multicultural society and context, can we still hold on to personal icons? Is it offensive to be using each other's icons? I think the question that Alan brought up there about the Spanish food is an interesting one, and one that I found. I don't think it became particularly controversial, really. It's just this thing of, well, if that's not how you make paella, you know, this is a British take on it. And that's always been, I think, a great way to get students talking in class as well is to say, well, look at this outsider and what they have to say about your culture, and have they got it right or have they got it wrong? And it's lovely for them to be able to say, well, no, actually it's wrong, you know, this is how it is. And it can be very empowering for students to be put in that position of being the ambassadors of and the explainers of their culture. And it's a very, very useful task for students to be able to do in class, I think, is to be able to explain to an outsider what goes on in their community and in their culture. And it's actually a kind of conversation that they might well find themselves in at some point. So it's quite easy for them to be able to project, imagine themselves doing that to a visitor into their culture. So the whole area of appropriation, misappropriation of culture is definitely interesting and one that's worth exploring with students, I think.
Yeah, there's lots of interesting questions coming in. Obviously, your talk has been food for thought for a lot of people, pardon the pun. I was particularly interested in this one from Georgi. How do you teach the target culture in a multinational ESL class? I suppose much depends on what you perceive the target culture to be, or even if there is a target culture. Have you got enough?
Yes, interesting. I think that, yeah. Sorry, Annie, yeah.
Sorry, no, carry on.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what I was going to say as well, this whole question of what is the target culture. And if we look back 30 or 40 years ago, the target culture was much more clearly seen as being British or American or another native-speaking country. But since then, we've definitely grown to see English as a lingua franca, which is being spoken more between people who are not from those classic target cultures, as it were. And English doesn't belong only to the English, and it hasn't done for a long, long time, but it doesn't only belong to native speakers either. It's a language which is being used all over the world. So in a way, we can say that the target culture is anywhere in the world where English is being used as a medium of communication between people. And so how do we teach that target culture in a multilingual ESL setting? Well, they are that target. It's wonderful. It's this idea of the language is yours. You know, it's kind of this them and us doesn't exist anymore. The language is everyone's. It's ours, but in the widest possible sense of ours. And I think one of the things we can do is look for examples of this kind of lingua franca communication, of people using a second language as their main language because that's how they can communicate with other people within their community, their subculture, their place of work, their place of study. And I think it's quite empowering as well to be able to explore these role models of people who are bilingual, trilingual, that English is just part of their language package, and to make people feel good about being members of that particular culture. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yes, no, it's interesting. There's another question. I think we've got time for another question. Laura asks, how can we create interest in teenagers to want to search for other cultures? Sometimes they don't even know about their own, which is especially true probably of younger teenagers. Do you have any suggestions about how that might be approached in a classroom context, Ceri?
Okay, so I think it's very, very true with the younger learners, the younger teenagers, that what they probably need is more self-awareness of the boundaries of their own culture, as it were. And what they're often very, very interested in is seeing how simple things, simple parts of the way we live are acted out differently in different places, or even slightly differently or very, very differently. So I'm thinking recently of a YouTube video that was being shared with a secondary class. We're talking 12, 13-year-olds. And it was, I'm sure you'll have seen something similar to this. It was difficult journeys to school, where kids were having to travel on horseback or walk, or there's one I'm sure that everyone will have seen of a particularly treacherous cliffside walkway where the children are kind of tied onto ropes and walking along this cliff to get to school. And then the kids talked about, well, how they got to school. Sort of the difference between the effort that was being made by these children and the effort that they were making. And it was just something that fired their imaginations, and they were really interested in talking about that particular topic. It doesn't take much to fire young imaginations, really, but I think it has to be something, there has to be a commonality, there has to be something which they recognize as being something that they do. So in that case, it's going to school, for example. Or it might simply be looking at a different kind of subject that's studied in another school, which isn't studied in their school, and to think, oh, wow, okay, that's interesting. They study that in school? And then they can think about the things that they study in school, maybe even talk about new subjects that they'd like to introduce into their curriculum. And in that way, they're also becoming aware of what does exist within their context. They're comparing that with what exists in another context, but always through this exploring similarities and connections. And I think if there's no connection, then there'll be no engagement. But if they can see that there's a connection, then that's what we need to exploit.
Okay, thanks very much, Ceri. And Christine asks, what kind of target vocabulary do you expect to cover? I'm not quite sure if you mean, Christine, in that unit, particular material that Ceri's been presenting, or I imagine that's what you intend.
I think it's an interesting question, because obviously it depends on level and proficiency, but from the point of view of developing materials, I think that the vocabulary that we present on the page is always going to be some kind of core vocabulary, kind of the most frequent vocabulary for food, for example, also based possibly on the items of vocabulary that students would be expected to know for a test, but that there should be activities within the lesson and hopefully within the material itself which encourages students to find the vocabulary that they need to talk about the things which are particularly relevant to them. And I think this is particularly relevant in the topic of food. So on the page you might see rice, bread, vegetables, fruit, meat, and these are all universals. But what you would expect the students to do would to then expand on that so that they include vocabulary about the fruit, for example, or the vegetables that are common in their particular context. So here, when I'm teaching in Spain, things like aubergine are very common, but I certainly wouldn't expect to find that in an A1 or an A2 level book, but my kids want to be able to say it. So that's the kind of vocabulary that I would expand on with those kids in particular. So not for fruit or vegetables that they're not going to come across, which are infrequent, but the ones which are relevant to them and which they're going to remember because they've got some kind of personal relevance. So I think the answer is we would teach core vocabulary for that topic within the level, but we would also encourage teachers and students to expand that particular set so that it became personally and locally and culturally relevant.
Okay, thanks very much, Ceri. I'm just going to squeeze one more question in that I can't resist. This is from Linda Shevchikova, and she says, what is your favourite food to eat and cook? Ceri, I think that's quite a good question.
Oh, right. Okay, that's such a difficult question. Oh, what's my favourite food? I think my favourite food to eat and my favourite food to cook is pretty different. So, to cook, I love cooking Italian food, pasta dishes of any sort, but also I love the bean soups and lentil soups and stuff like that that I grew to love when I was living in Italy. and to eat seafood, of which I find kind of more complicated and messy. I'm not always very confident that I can cook it well. So if I go to a restaurant, I'm more likely to order some seafood, I think. And if I'm at home, I'm more likely to cook some pasta con fagioli or something like that.
Okay, thanks very much, Ceri. And I'm afraid that's all we've got time for today. But please don't forget to check our events page for details of our upcoming webinars, which you can visit at cambridge.org/ELT events. Okay, so the recording of today's webinar should be live on our blog and also the YouTube channel next week. And please don't forget to download your certificate from the link on the screen. Thank you very much for coming, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ceri.
Thank you, Anna.